Today we talk about IVF terms that sound impressive, they get used interchangeably, but they shouldn't because they're not the same.
I'm Dr. Mark Amols, and this is Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.
Whenever I'm doing a consult, a lot of times I'll get asked by patients if we do back-to-back cycles, or they'll say DuoStim or double stimulation or accelerated IVF. And there's a lot of confusion because people use these terms as if they all mean the same thing, and they don't. And so I have to then figure out first what they want to do, and then second, are they even using the right term for it? Then I have to figure out why they want to do it, because sometimes people think one must be better. And that is the purpose of today's podcast, trying to clear up the confusion between what all these terms mean and what they really represent. Because in the end, they're still using the same ovaries, the same egg pools, they just are a little bit different calendars. None of these actually magically upgrade your eggs, but that doesn't mean there aren't times that these can be useful. So let's talk about what it even means. Now, depending where you are, you're going to hear different terms. So for example, in the academic world, they may use words like DuoStim, dual stimulation, or double ovarian stimulation, biphasic stimulation, luteal-phase stimulation. There's even some clinics that call it the Shanghai protocol. And all those represent a DuoStim, which is 2 stimulations in 1 menstrual cycle. Now on the patient side, you'll hear other type of marketing terms, such as 2 retrievals in 1 cycle, or double retrieval, fast-track IVF, accelerated IVF, or IVF without waiting for your next period. All these are the same. It means stimulating, and then as soon as you retrieve the eggs, you stimulate again with 0 break. As I mentioned, 2 stimulations in 1 menstrual cycle. Now, when it comes to back-to-back cycles, this means 2 separate IVF cycles in consecutive months. So the clinical terms you'll hear in this are going to be like consecutive IVF, or 2 sequential stim cycles, or embryo banking. Now, on the patient side, they may call it a back-to-back IVF, or another cycle right away, or monthly retrievals. Now, in this situation, what we're talking about is undergoing a retrieval, then getting your period, and then going into another retrieval. So for some people, if let's say they're using priming like birth control, they won't use the priming in the second cycle because they go right away into the next cycle. And then this is different than just saying doing 2 separate cycles, which would mean, let's say you do priming with birth control, you do your IVF cycle, you get your period, and then you go back on birth control, and then you do the next cycle. So that would take you up to 3 months. And that's the most important part about all of this. It's about timing. And there are some people who should use one over the other. Think of it like meals. You can either have 1 meal today and 1 tomorrow, or you can eat 2 meals today and space them a little bit apart, or eat them in the same sitting. But in the end, you still consume the same amount of calories. You didn't double any nutrition, you didn't change the food quality, you just changed the timeline. And that's kind of what these are. They just change the timeline. But there are times that might be better for some people. Just like for some people, eating 1 meal a day might be good for them, but for other people, it may be bad for their metabolism. So let's start with what's normal. A normal standard IVF cycle is going to have a stimulation, 1 egg retrieval, and a menstrual cycle. And whatever you call back-to-back cycles, what it truly means is to do a full IVF cycle, but when you get a period, you immediately start the other cycle. So you don't have to have a break in between. It's basically IVF twice. And then when it comes to DuoStim, or some call dual stimulation, you undergo a stimulation in the follicular phase, and you have egg retrieval. And then you start stimming before the next period after you retrieve the eggs. So a second retrieval occurs before you even get your menses. So literally 2 stimulations, 1 cycle. So let's talk next about which is better for different people. As you can imagine, everyone is going to be a good candidate for just a normal standard IVF. You're not going to hurt anything by doing a cycle and then waiting a month in between and doing another cycle, because then you can do the priming and be prepared. What I find is that people who do back-to-back cycles, again, this is having 2 cycles in 2 months, it doesn't always work well for people who make lots of follicles. And the reason why is because you can sometimes develop cysts. And if you develop a bunch of cysts, it's not going to have time to go away before you start the next cycle. Now, if you make fewer follicles, there's going to be fewer chances of getting cysts. I always liken this to, let's say, driving cars. If you have one person who drives 100 miles every day and another one who drives 10 miles every day, the person who drives 100 miles every day will have a higher risk of having a car accident. They're just driving more. Well, the same thing, if you make lots of eggs, then you have a higher chance of developing a cyst that won't go away before your next cycle. Now, it doesn't mean all cysts are going to prevent you from moving forward, but there are many that will. So essentially, if you are, let's say, a poor responder or maybe don't make a lot of eggs, it may be a great cycle for you. But if you're someone who is a high responder, it may be better to actually take the break, get better synchronization, and move forward the next month if you want to do another cycle. But what about DuoStim? Who is a good candidate for that? Well, I think we should separate 2 things here. There's DuoStim and luteal-phase stimming. DuoStim has a luteal-phase stim in it. The first part would be follicular. The second stimulation will be in the luteal phase. Now, for someone, let's say, who has cancer or has very limited time, a DuoStim would be great because now they can get 2 cycles in 1 month, or maybe 2 cycles before starting treatment like chemotherapy. But let's say you're doing it because you want to use a luteal phase. Well, then you don't have to undergo a DuoStim. You can just wait till you ovulate and then start stimulation. This is great for people who have early recruitment. If your body is not synchronizing the eggs and you keep getting early recruitment with a lead follicle, this is perfect because when your body ovulates, the progesterone kind of suppresses everything, creating a natural priming, and then you can start stimming and get eggs, and they usually won't have that lead follicle issue. Now, the problem is you do have some suppression. And so sometimes it takes a little bit more medication to get the eggs to grow, and it limits you from using certain flare effects, such as microdose Lupron, Clomid, or Femara. And that's because the high level of progesterone is going to shut down the pituitary. Pituitary can't work because it's already shut down. So if you're someone who wants a microdose Lupron protocol or some type of co-flare protocol, you're not going to be able to do it if you're doing a luteal phase stimulation. And that's what you see in DuoStims. The first stim will be one type of cycle, the second stim will be a little bit different because one is in the follicular phase and the second one is in the luteal phase. So if you're someone who needs a flare protocol, you may not benefit from a luteal phase stim. One example would be patients who have a very high FSH level. If you have a high FSH level, you might need something like letrozole to stimulate the pituitary so you can have a synergistic effect with the external injections you're taking to make the eggs grow. By now having the pituitary and external hormones, you're able to double up the hormones or higher and get better response. So someone who has a very high FSH level, you may find that if you do a normal stim in the follicular phase with Femara and gonadotropins, you may make, let's say, 8 eggs. But if you did it in the luteal phase, you won't get that same response, and now you may only get 4 eggs because you can't get the same level of FSH because now you're only using external hormones because you shut down the pituitary gland. So you can see how DuoStim isn't always perfect for everyone. If you don't want to do 2 cycles and you want to have a luteal phase stim, you just do a luteal phase stim. So after you ovulate, they start the stim. You don't have to do 2 cycles. Now, you don't have to just take my word for it. There's actually data on this. And what it's shown is the research has shown that when you do both of these stims, you basically get similar egg numbers, similar egg quality, and similar pregnancy and live birth rates. So DuoStim does not improve outcomes, but it does improve efficiency because you can get more in a shorter amount of time. And that is not lost here. If you are a poor responder or have very limited time, that may matter. If you have cancer and you have to undergo treatment and you're racing the clock, that matters. But if you're young and not on borrowed time, you may not benefit by doing a DuoStim. Now, one of the limitations of these studies is they're usually done on poor responders. They were not done on, let's say, regular responders or high responders. And there has been some randomized control trials. And again, they showed no difference in the egg yield. And interesting enough, when it came to transfers, the conventional 2 cycles ended up being a little bit better. But that's only with regards to reaching transfer or embryos transferred. When they actually looked at the statistical difference between implantation and live birth rate, there was no statistical difference. In retrospective studies, back in 2022, one was done, they also found that there were fewer frozen embryos with DuoStim, but the live birth rate was not different statistically. Now, with the retrospective data, there's definitely some concern when you're comparing the groups because sometimes the worst patients may go on the DuoStim and that's going to lead to less embryos. But it was still good to see that there wasn't a difference in live birth rate, which means it's not worse, it just isn't better. So in the end, if your goal is speed, DuoStim can be useful because it compresses 2 retrievals into 1 menstrual cycle. If the goal is better outcomes, well, currently, in direct comparison studies, it does not prove that DuoStim improves live birth rate when compared to 2 conventional stim cycles. So how can you then determine what the clinic is doing? When you hear aggressive IVF or accelerated IVF or double retrieval, fast track IVF or fast track cycles, the question you need to ask is, am I starting again before or after my next period? If the answer isn't clear, ask again. And if it's still not clear, well, that's a red flag. But if you start the stim before you get your period, that is a DuoStim. If you start the stim after you get your period, then that would be a second cycle. And if it's directly the next cycle, it would be considered a back-to-back cycle. Now, in the end, I can't tell anyone that's wrong to do these cycles, but what I can tell you is that DuoStims and back-to-back make sense for people with poor ovarian reserve, people who have even early recruitment cycles, people who are trying to, in a very fast amount of time, have embryo banking or egg banking, and again, with fertility preservation like we talked about. But what I can definitely say is that people who are normal responders, high responders, it likely is not going to benefit you much. It's just going to shorten the time frame. Maybe you were like me and kind of getting confused with all these terms, going, well, what does that mean, a DuoStim or a back-to-back? And now maybe you have a better understanding of it, and maybe you were thinking about doing it, and maybe now you may say, oh, it's not really for me. In the end, there is never a wrong answer. You just need to make sure you talk to your doctor and make sure together you decide what's best for you. If this episode was helpful for you, or maybe you think for a friend, tell them about it. Tell your friends about it, and keep spreading the word about this podcast. If you love us, give us a 5-star review on your favorite medium, but most of all, keep coming back. I look forward to talking to you again next week on Taco Bout Fertility Tuesday.